Welcome to the InStory Show. I'm Devorah Spilman, usually your host. But today, I am thrilled to introduce you to Kay Rettich, who is a graduate of InStory and InStory expert, part of my InStory leadership team. And today, Kay is going to be interviewing me. So, Kay, introduce yourself a little bit, say a little bit about who you are and what you do in the world, and why you wanted to interview me.
Okay, I'm Kay Rettich. I've been in InStory for a little over a year, and about 6 months ago, Devorah invited me to be on her leadership team, which I gratefully accepted. And when the topic of this show came up, Devorah asked me if I wanted to be one of the InStory experts on the show. And I told her I didn't need to do that because I was just on the last show. But wouldn't it be cool if somebody interviewed you, Devorah? And I volunteered to do it because the one thing that InStory has done for me since I joined it is allow me to stretch in ways that I wouldn't do otherwise. I am shy and introverted, and although I don't have trouble talking one-on-one with somebody, the idea that I'm going to be asking them questions while we're being recorded was intimidating for me. So I decided this is what I need to do because it's another stretch for me. So do you want me to go ahead and start asking you questions?
Yes, so go ahead and just dive in. And it's funny, I just want to make a point that it's such a good example of the theme of this whole series, which is to dare to be seen and to come out of hiding. And one of the things I said to Kay is, Kay, she made a list of all kinds of questions to ask. I said, just use your list. Because really, honestly, if you are introverted, there's no glory in not using something written. Write it down. Give yourself the support, because one of the things for introverts is you have to understand how to get in front of people and understand that it might not always feel easy, but you can do it. So you're a good example, Kay.
Yes. So I have my questions written not only on my computer screen, but also I have a backup right here. So I know what I'm going to do, know what I'm going to ask. So first of all, I'd like to talk about the fall edition of the InStory Show. Have you noticed any recurring themes in all of the people that you've interviewed for this show? If you have, tell us why you think those themes are coming out right now.
So, it's such a great question. Like, I looked at these questions and said, oh, such good questions. and yeah, what it turns out is really the theme that's come out is sort of this pattern that has to do with people's story. What I have noticed is that almost everybody has this pattern, and all of you probably have it too. As a kid, you have memories of being yourself, full of your creativity or your spirituality or your psychic ability or your sensitivity, intuition, whatever it was, and you shine it out with all your vim and vigor of your youthfulness, and then wham, a range of and sundry things happen, and it gets shut down. And almost everybody has this experience, and some of those shutdowns are horrid abuse, and some are just cluelessness on behalf of well-meaning adults. But what I have seen and what I have asked, and you'll see in each of the interviews just about, is what's your childhood story where you were free to be yourself? How did you get shut down, and what was the cost of that? And this is the thing I've seen, and I've heard really a couple of women said that they literally got a message, like a higher guidance message. If you stay in this hard situation, you will die. But other women got all different other kinds of messages, but there comes a point where living that life shut down from this authentic flow, creative place ends up being at such a cost that there's some women talk about how they start to feel sick. Like the body starts to give you really loud messages if you can't hear it in any other way. And then you have turning point stories. So the theme is sort of these childhood stories, the shutting down of everything. And then the turning point stories, meaning what caught you, turned everything around, changed your perspective, and how did you take that journey out of that place of being shut down, and how did you open it back up? And what I really believe is that when we hear each other's stories, you can find yourself in someone else's story, which I think honestly can give another person the courage to find their turning point moment. Like, you don't know when you tell your story that maybe someone who hears it, your story is their turning point moment.
So Devorah, what happened to you that shut you down, and what was your turning point story?
So I don't know if I think for me, it was when I started to understand my parents' stories about the Holocaust. Both my parents were Holocaust survivors. They both thankfully got out, but interestingly, they both grew up, my father in Holland and my mother in Germany, before Hitler, in very assimilated, happy, healthy, wealthy families. And then that all got, that was like this whole shutdown, right? And they escaped, both of them escaped to England, which is where they actually met. But I began to hear stories about this horror. And I remember as a kid thinking, why are you telling me this? Because I can't do anything about it. And I think what happened was I remember one other thing. I remember my mother telling me that she was in Germany on Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass. We just had the Memorial Day for that. And she had been taken over to the neighbors who were their friends, right? They were very assimilated right into the culture, and they were hidden in a room in the top of the house. And it was kind of miraculous because my mother's family was friends with the police, so they didn't actually do anything to their house. But she would tell me she remembered standing at the window in that room at the top of the neighbor's house, looking out saying, I swear that I will never let this happen to my children. So I had to be happy in order for my mother to be okay, for her to keep her promise. If I seemed to be unhappy, it meant she wasn't keeping her promise. So I shut down a certain authentic feeling part of myself. And I think there are a lot of people who've had that sense that you lose the ability to know what you want because you have designed your entire life to want what this other person who your survival depends upon wants for you, right? And so my mother was like better than average narcissist. She was very narcissistic, but very loving and generous. But when my mother walked in the room, it was always all about her. I mean, for example, when my parents got divorced and then my mother learned to fly single engine airplane, which she flew around the world. I mean, she just wasn't a subtle person. And so I just learned how to be the way she needed me to be. And it took and so the turning points for me were realizing that I could do I didn't have to stop doing what I loved, but I learned how to, what I talk about now, how to fall down and get up much better. Like I had an earlier one-woman show I did called I'm Fine, I'm Fine, I'm Fine. Like I learned how to be fine on the outside. And I think that's what happens to a lot of people. So I learned eventually how to actually feel the real feelings and then get back up from them authentically. And I think, I don't know I don't know if I had a specific turning point moment, but I will say that there was one part of my story that was both important in the real world and metaphorically important, which I had this sense that I could conceive things, but I couldn't manifest them. And that once I was married, I went through 10 years of infertility, and both our daughters are adopted. But I remembered at a certain point thinking, I'm praying for children not to get pregnant. And and my husband and I decided to look into adoption. And I remember standing in the office of the adoption attorney, and I had this intuition that our child was already conceived, and I was at the birth of our daughter 5 months later. And it was like this proof that sometimes the picture you set up of how it has to happen is not the only box you're in.
Right. And
so then once I created the InStory way, I remember walking the forest one day going, this isn't true, this you can't conceive anymore because you have a business. I went, whoa, right? Because I still run into of all these ideas and I don't do all of them. So part of it is those moments of pause where you realize I'm not in the old story anymore. So those are some of those moments for me, in a sense.
Okay, going back to the InStory show, one of the things that makes the interview series unique is that you invite the women from InStory to take part and be interviewed on the show. And it's not a requirement. We don't have to do it, but we can do it. And it's a really good experience for all of us to feel what it's like to be seen. So how did you come up with that idea? Because most people only have world leaders on their shows. They don't have regular people on their shows.
I know. I love to say that one of my favorite things is I have a whole new harebrained scheme and I might not know why I have it until later. Even creating InStory, I was like, what the heck is that name? And now it's like, has a lot of meaning. I don't know. It was like a lot of times, and this is what happens as you start to trust yourself more, you just get an idea and you learn to trust it. So I went, I'm putting my clients on my show. And of course, the first year I did it, I went to them and they said, no, Devorah, we are so not doing that. And I said, oh, yes, you are. I still get that response. No. Many people like in our group were like, no, Devorah, I don't think it's a good idea.
I think everybody has that initial response.
And what's so amazing, Kay, and you know this from experience, because I always quote Kay, who says, after I finally interviewed her the first time, she said, Devorah, I have no spit left in my mouth.
I was really nervous.
Right, and that's true. And almost all the women, after I finally clicked the recording off, they all go, it's almost like you can't breathe while you're being interviewed. And but here's the thing. Here's why I did it, and what I completely believe and still believe is that being famous isn't the only qualification for having something to say that makes a difference. And I actually really believe that there is something happening now that with all these tools that are now available to us, we are literally energetically, spiritually being called forward to share this wisdom we have. And a lot of it is being called to share this wisdom we were born with, that we shut down, that's opening back up. And now you don't need to be on like TV. You could just click the camera in your living room and broadcast to the world. It's like unbelievable what we can do now. And so all of a sudden we have the means to connect. And, and we can see all these tools being used in ways we don't like. So why wouldn't we use them in these really elevated, spiritually uplifting and inspiring ways? And so what I discovered was that what it does is it really allows somebody who feeling called to share, to have their first absolute no bars, no bars held, nothing held back, to actually share in public. And what's funny about it is that, of course, all you're really doing is having a pre-recorded interview with me, but it never feels like that.
No, it doesn't.
And so then what it does is it starts to rebuild those old wires, because what happens in the shutdown phase is that we all get told in one way or another that you're not good enough. What you have to say isn't valuable. It's not a good idea. It's not safe if you say it. It's not good if you say it. So that then the idea of saying it feels terrible. And when you do it, it rebuilds that. Because what happens inevitably, the person is totally scared. We talk for like half an hour, then I do the interview and they all say, if it's not good, can we re-record? Yes, of course. Right? And Kay and I are, even before this one, we're going, well, if this isn't good, we can re-record.
Yes, we did.
And so this feeling like it's not going to be good. And then it comes out good. And every time the women watch themselves and go, oh, I wasn't as bad as I thought. And that, what that does is it rebuilds that old message into a new one. It's like getting new muscles that say what I have to say has value, and I'm going to be sharing it with the people who want that message. You know, because part of the problem is when we were growing up, we were stuck with whoever was around us. And they were not always capable of receiving our elevated, inspirational messages, right? And so we got in trouble, but now we invite an audience that resonates. So you are giving your message over to people who have already like kind of been drawn in and need it. And that's a very different thing, you know, and one of the things I say all the time that helps a lot is if something moves you, it will move your audience. And that, I think that helps a lot too.
So if somebody has been watching this series and they've been inspired by one or more of the speakers, what can she do to overcome her, I'm not sure if I'm brave enough to do that, or I'm good enough, am I really worth it? What's the next thing she could do to try to take the next step forward to being seen?
All right, I'm going to make you answer that question. What do you think, Kay? Yeah, seriously, what helped you? The reason is because what helped you, right? You were scared to be seen, and
yes.
you know, and you still stepped forward. Why? What helped you do that? Because I think, and I can say, you know, we're going to give people steps to go through that will help them, and we'll talk about that at the end. But if you don't mind, I think it would be meaningful for you to share a little bit about how did you do that?
I heard Devorah once, and I thought, she's really interesting, and then I didn't do anything. Then I heard her again on another interview series, and her free gift was some exercises that you could do on her website. And so I thought, well, if I can do those exercises, maybe I could make an appointment to talk with her. So I spent a lot of time and I worked really hard doing these exercises. And I was just so excited by what I discovered when I did the exercises that I decided I was worth it. And I made an appointment with you. And the whole time we were talking, I kept thinking, oh, I hope I can do this. I hope I can do this. And I had to argue with myself quite a bit because I wasn't sure if I was really worth it. I mean, it wasn't like, you know, a need that I had to do this. It was just something that I wanted to do. And I finally decided that I was worth it, and I joined. And it was a turning point story for me, joining InStory, because a lot of things are different in my life now than they would have been had I not.
Like what?
Well, I have a whole new business that I would have never even thought of. I was telling Devorah about some of the collages that I do, and she asked if I would show some of them. And, you know, when we do stuff ourselves, it's just a hobby. There's nothing special about it. And Devorah and the other women in InStory finally convinced me that there was something special about it and I should do something with it. So I started a business called Collage, and I am I wrote a whole bunch of processes for me to help people, guide them by looking through the collages and going inside and finding answers that they didn't know that they had there. And I had so much fun doing that I decided, okay, now I'm going to make a whole new set of cards, and I'm going to write a book to go with the cards. And so I have all kinds of things that I'm doing now that I would have never thought of doing had I not been inside of a group of women with Devorah leading the way and taking me by the hand and saying, you can do this. What else can you do? I mean, I certainly would not be interviewing somebody for any kind of anything if I hadn't been part of InStory and you hadn't encouraged me to keep stretching myself.
And you know, it's so funny because the whole idea for Key Collage came in our preparation for your first interview.
Yeah, it did.
Right? Because part of the thing is when you have to be interviewed, you have to know your story, what you're going to talk about, and then you have to offer a free gift. And a lot of the women are like, what the heck? I don't, what am I supposed to do? I don't have anything. I don't do anything. And one of the things I have discovered is that it's a very honing in process. And what it does is it allows everybody to pull all of their unique talents together and see that they can actually make a difference for someone. You know, because one of the lines I often say is that we're all a little invisible to ourselves. And so one of the things that happens in InStory is that you become able to see much more of your abilities reflected back to you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what happened to me.
Yeah. So should I talk a little bit about sort of the process of InStory itself?
Right, and while you're doing that, well, first, before you do that,
mm-hmm.
Tell us why imagination is so important in InStory, because that has been a big part in helping me grow. So how did you know that imagination was such an important part? And
then I want you to tell how it's helped you grow also. So imagination is like my passion soapbox my whole life. And, you know, this is one of those things where you can all find this too. And I looked back at my life and it's like, I've always made up stories my whole life, made up imaginary stories like the world of Zambadoodle and all that. So when I was in undergraduate school and I was studying education and theater, and that I ended up writing my undergraduate thesis on the importance of imagination in learning. And I really saw, and a lot of what I studied was that what we have in America, and sadly we still have it till this day, is education for obedience. If you think about it, we really have largely education for government obedience, something like that, or it was the Industrial Revolution, like to make good workers, and we kind of still have that. Which is why I talk about how InStory is kind of like the movement called unschooling. Because finally, like John Hoyt, who's an educational writer, he eventually said, I can't write about improving the educational system. And he started writing about homeschooling, but he called it unschooling, and how we have to unschool ourselves from the school mode of thinking that it's only right answers. You stay in the box, you do only what you have to, and there's no vision, no imagination. And I think it's really one of the most significant flaws, in a way, in our system, is that we are not supporting children in the way they actually are. That imagination is one of the most extraordinary human abilities, and it's not taught, and unfortunately, it's often shut down. Like actually actively shut down. And so I spent my whole first part of my career, what I like to call now, infiltrating the system, because I'm a really good storyteller. I'm a professional storyteller for, over 40 years. And what I did was I went into the school system, first the public schools and then the Jewish schools, and I told stories. And what happened is it would create this literal hush in the room. And the children went into this other realm. Just like in InStory, I guide you into that realm. That's what I did with the kids. And it's funny, when I wrote my undergraduate thesis, my husband helped me, and he's a therapist, and he introduced me to the work of Bandler and Grinder, who based it on Milton Erickson, and he used story as a hypnosis technique to help people get into an altered state so he could give them suggestions. And my husband said, that's what you do. I went, oh, really? Because a lot of times when it's your natural gift, you don't know what you're doing. And it's actually why Milton Erickson didn't write the same book that Bandler and Grinder did. They created NLP based on what he did. He didn't talk about it like that. So this is another thing that happens partly in InStory is you become able to see your gift, because our gifts are invisible to us. And kind of what goes along with this devaluing imagination, because imagination is easy. It's easy. It's fun. It's flow. And we have somehow been taught that the only things that have value are things that are hard, painful, and require effort. If it's not hard, painful, and doesn't require effort, it can't possibly be valuable, and you can't charge money for it, and you can't make it your job. What the heck with that? And in school, what are you supposed to work hardest at? The thing you're bad at.
Right.
What the heck is with that? It's crazy. You don't get to say to someone, oh, so music's not your best subject, but you're really good at art. Great, take more art classes. They'll say, oh no, you're bad at this, go do more of this. Like, does it? Sigh. As I say, these are, part of what's fun in interviews is we get to get up on our soapboxes. And I'm always telling people, get up on your soapbox and preach it, rant and rave, and that's actually a really good way to figure out what you have to say. I will often tell people, when you're home privately all alone, go on a rant and a rave. But when you tap into imagination, it is a way to access this other realm. And people will call it all different things. And I coined the term specifically spiritual imagination because of that intersection between the spiritual and the imaginative, because imagination is a free pass. Because I didn't want, in that realm, if I'm going to go talk to my angels or guides or people who passed away, I didn't want to have to deal with science or theology. I didn't want to have to prove in my Jewish world that this really exists, and I didn't want to prove in my science world that this is true. It is true in a different realm. Like I'm always telling people in our group, what you get in this realm is true. And it's true in the realm of feeling. It's true in this other deep way of knowing. And one of the things that I teach is that in this realm, you ask and you trust the first thing you get. And which is a key to accessing content from this realm, because it outsmarts that ego resistance mind that's going to constantly try to stop you from that. And then you just get better and better at it. And the other thing, Kay, that I know you've experienced and everyone experiences, it's like food for our starving souls. I think whenever you go into this realm, you feel so happy. It's so soul nourishing and it's joyous. I don't know, it just makes us feel so great. And it's almost like, why didn't anybody tell us this? So yeah, I could go on. And at some point I think I should do a whole series on imagination.
Yes, you should. The reason why I like imagination so much is because when you take us into the realm of spiritual imagination, if I thought when I get here, I'm going to have a guide, something to be really profound, I was there in dead silence because I'm convinced I don't know how to hear that kind of stuff. So I would just sit there and think, well, it's not fun. But because you give me permission to use my imagination, I can imagine anything I want in this realm of spiritual imagination. And all kinds of things happen to me there. It's okay if it's your imagination. And then the things I get are so profound. I don't know where they came from, but it's just because I let my imagination run wild. And when you let your imagination run wild, it'll take you wild places.
Yeah, and it's amazing. Like I had Leslie, who you'll hear her on the series also. She said she was in a whole shaman training. Every time they led her through these guided journeys, she got nothing until she came into InStory. There's something about the sweet sort of simplicity of the imagination that does just what you said. It allows people access. And I think that's a big part of the problem, is that we don't have access. You know, people will say to me, I know of all these stories, but I don't know where to start, or I don't know what to say, and I just can't do it. And all the time I'm trying and nothing's happening. And I lead them through one session, and it's like, chewy, you know, all this stuff opens up. And I think we need access and we need support. Mm-hmm. Like those two things, like it doesn't work to try to do this deep work alone. And also you need tools to gain access because we weren't taught.
Would you like to describe to us what a typical InStory session is like?
Okay, so I do sessions one-on-one, especially for people who feel they have a deep story calling them forward, and that it becomes this very compelling sense that there's something you have to say. One of my dearest, sweetest clients, who's been with me practically from the beginning, for almost 6 years on and off. She came to me because she had been seduced by a priest when she was a young married woman, and it broke up her marriage, and they didn't do anything to that priest, and they just moved him to another place. And after much healing work and amazing transformational work, she's an extraordinary human. She said, okay, I'm supposed to talk about this. And she couldn't. So we began our work, and a typical session is someone gets on like this with me, and I say, okay, what's going on? And you just talk about where you are in your life, what's going on. And then we do my InStory Way guided process. And then we see what you get from that. And then we connect the dots. And one of the things that I do really well and that people can get trained to get much better at is how do you understand what the metaphors are telling you? Because the language of the soul in this imaginal realm and this higher realm, all the things you call it, is image, metaphor, and story. Like that's really how it speaks. Just like our dreams are like that. And so you can really learn how to understand the message from this realm. And so then what happens is then I help the person connect the dots between what they're working on, what's going on with them, the meaning of what they get. And often it's how do you combine your story with your image and metaphor, which leads to the meaning and the message behind your story. Right. So then they get the instruction, just go write that. Just go write what you got. And then they don't have to figure out what to write.
Right.
And then in the InStory group, I teach something that I'm thinking about, some big idea. And then we do the InStory guided process, and then everybody shares what they got. And it's amazing because often what comes to one person, it's not just for them, it's often for someone else. And it starts to open up worlds. It just starts to lift us up out of this constricted realm that we've lived in. And it gives us an ability to, bring this vision, message, story that's being asked of us forward.
One of the things you also do, Devorah, is have a Facebook Live every morning at 9 o'clock Pacific, noon my time. And every single day, you have some kind of message or story to tell. I would have a hard time coming up with something important to say every single day. What do you do in your own practice to allow these ideas to come to you so that you have messages every day to give to people?
So first of all, you have to know yourself. I would never tell you to do that. Really, I would say do it once a week and plan out what you're going to say. Because part of it is owning who you are. I do it every morning, and I am because I like to. It's really fun for me. I'm super spontaneous. That's part of how I am. Like, just try to get me to plan something. I like that spontaneity. And I've usually been up for 2 to 3 hours before 9 a.m. And I have either channeled something myself, or I've listened to someone, or something has happened. And so that's how I work. Like, that is one of my gifts, is being spontaneous. I can make up anything, anytime, for anybody. Like, that used to be my great gift as the teacher they brought on field trips. Oh no, we're stuck here, Devorah. And I would just make up a story out of my head. And I can do that literally anywhere, anytime, and I will enjoy it so much. If I ask an introvert to do that, they're going to kill me. Like, Devorah! So I wouldn't do that. So part of it is you need to honor who you are. And don't try to be like me. You need to be like you, right? And so one of the things I wanted to say that I didn't get to say is one of the things I've seen as a flow that people go through that help a little bit with this, and what helps when people come into InStory, and this came to me only like a year or so ago, is this, it goes through this flow, and I love alliteration, so I love this, of shift, shape, and share. And this first thing called shift, that's this work of getting out of the box. It's shifting out of those old stories. And really that's the first step. And it's the step you come back to as you grow, right? Oh, now I'm going to do this. Yikes. So then you got to shift again. And then shaping it is this whole work of like shaping it into key collage, for example. Like you had all this talent, but it wasn't shaped into something. Mm-hmm. And shaping it has to do with getting the images and the metaphors and sharing everything about yourself and getting prepared to be on an InStory show. And then being a speaker is the sharing it with the world. And that push to go from shifting to shaping to sharing is, I think, really what helps people get unstuck, get out, out of the spin cycle. Like you were saying, like what helps somebody? If you're listening and you're one of those people who you really wish you were brave enough to be interviewed because you know you have something to say, that's what this whole year of work, that's why it is a whole year, because you go through this deep shifting and you learn the tools of how to shift over and over and over. And so people can go on my website. I have a specific free gift that we'll talk about for this, but on my website is webinar I did a few years ago, but I really love it, so it's still there, called How to Get Out of the Goo. And it's a very fundamental teaching of mine with 2 of my guided processes that will really help you. So that's one thing, and that's the process of shift. It's the beginning process of shifting out of being trapped in your old story, right? That one that got us shut down, you got to start to shift out of that. So that's sort of the long answer to your question.
So do you want to tell us what your free gift is?
Yeah. So Kay and I were concocting what should we do for you guys to help you, because part of our goal is to help you, the theme of the series, to help you come out of hiding and dare to be seen. And we know you can't do that alone. And we know it's not a super easy step. So what we're going to do is we're going to host an InStory workshop, like kind of a live peek into what InStory is really about, and how whichever InStory members and experts are free are going to come on to a live Zoom workshop. We're going to do it on Monday next week, the 25th, 2 p.m. Pacific. You'll get a link with all the information, so don't worry about that. And you will have a chance to experience what an actual InStory call is like. And you'll be part of a Zoom call. Be prepared to be on camera, ideally, like this, so we can see you, right? I'm really bad about that. I'm like, turn on your camera, come on, let's be seen. And you'll have a chance to be seen, to be on live with us. And I will lead the call. We'll talk about something. I'll lead an InStory way guided process. I don't know if we'll have time for every single person to share in that moment, but we'll hear from some of the InStory experts. We'll have a little bit of Q&A as well. We'll probably go 90 minutes. That's usually how long I do things. And then you'll have an opportunity after that. I will be offering a free soul story session to you to help you see what's next for you. But what we wanted to do was to give you a taste and help you to begin to rewire that old story into one that you are worth it. So we're excited about that.
Yes, we are. So do you have one more thing you'd like to leave the audience with?
So I think now I always have to have a taste of my own medicine. Now I have to have last words, But what I want to say is is really be brave. If you are here watching this interview, then it's a sign that something is calling you forward. You have a soul calling. And when you really tap into your soul story, it will help reveal to you your purpose. And the thing is, that calling of the soul, it doesn't go away. And as I'm sure you'll have heard in some of the interviews, if you spend too long not answering it, it doesn't feel good. So be brave and trust this calling of your soul, and trust that you're worth it. We have seen this over and over, and I truly think the world needs us. Honestly, I think the world needs us. And if you're here, it's because you kind of know that. And you don't have to do it alone. So that is my last thing, is click below, sign up, join us, be brave, and dare to be seen.
Well, thank you, Devorah, for allowing me to interview you today. And I hope we see everybody who's listening now during the InStory workshop.
All right, everybody. And as I always say in farewell, remember to go out in the world, share your story, live your purpose, and be a blessing. Thanks, Kay. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.